As I stood in the shadow of the Ferris wheel, the laughter of children echoed around me, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within. My heart raced, not from the thrill of the rides, but from the gut-wrenching realization that my wife, the woman I had loved for years, had betrayed me with a man who operated the very rides that brought joy to so many. The betrayal cut deep, and as I watched them together, my mind raced with thoughts of revenge. How could I let this go unpunished? The ride operator, with his carefree smile and charming demeanor, had taken something irreplaceable from me. I knew I had to act, and I would make sure his career took a wild turn. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when I believed my life was perfect. I'm Jake, a 35-year-old graphic designer living in a small town on the outskirts of a bustling city. My wife, Sarah, was the light of my life. We met during college, both art students, passionate about our crafts. She had a smile that could brighten the darkest days and a laugh that resonated like music. We shared dreams of traveling the world, creating art, and starting a family. Our life together was filled with love, and I thought we were inseparable. But recently, things had changed. The spark between us had dimmed. I had noticed Sarah becoming more distant, her laughter less frequent. I chalked it up to work stress. She was a dedicated event planner at a local firm. I tried to be supportive, but I could feel an invisible wall building between us. It wasn't until that fateful day at the theme park that everything came crashing down. The theme park was a popular spot for families and couples, filled with vibrant colors, thrilling rides, and the scent of popcorn wafting through the air. We had decided to spend a Saturday there, a last-ditch effort to rekindle our connection. As we wandered through the park, I noticed a ride operator, a guy named Tony, who seemed to have an infectious energy. He was tall, with a chiseled jaw and a playful grin, effortlessly charming everyone around him, including Sarah. I brushed it off at first, thinking nothing of it. But then I saw it. The way she looked at him, the way her laughter came alive in his presence. It was a sight that sent a shiver down my spine. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I told myself I was being paranoid, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Later that evening, as we were leaving the park, I caught a glimpse of them together, Sarah and Tony, standing close, whispering and laughing as if they shared a secret. My heart sank. I fought the urge to confront her right then and there. Instead, I drove us home in silence, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal. I had to know the truth. That night I waited until she was asleep, my heart pounding as I scrolled through her phone. I found messages that confirmed my worst fears, flirty exchanges, plans to meet up, and even explicit texts that left no doubt about their relationship. The pain was unbearable. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, had betrayed me with a theme park ride operator. I remember feeling a mix of anger and despair. I wanted to scream, to cry, to confront her right then and there, but I knew I had to tread carefully. I had to think. I had to plan. The rage bubbling within me needed an outlet, and I knew exactly where to direct it. Tony had to pay for what he had done. The pain of betrayal clawed at my insides, but it was quickly replaced by a burning desire for revenge. I spent the next few days in a haze, going through the motions of life while my mind raced with thoughts of what I could do to make Tony pay for his part in tearing my life apart. I had never been the type to resort to vengeance, but the sheer audacity of his actions ignited something dark within me. I needed to gather information about him. Who was this ride operator who had so easily swept my wife off her feet? I found out that Tony was in his late 20s, a college dropout who had taken a job at the theme park after failing to find a career in his desired field. He was charming, athletic, and had a reputation among the park staff for being a flirt. It made sense now why. Sarah was drawn to him. He was everything I wasn't, carefree, fun, and seemingly unburdened by the responsibilities of adult life. I spent hours at the park, pretending to enjoy the rides, all the while keeping a close eye on Tony. I watched him interact with guests, noting how he effortlessly engaged with children and their parents, the way he cracked jokes and made everyone feel special. It made my blood boil. How could he be so charming while my heart lay in pieces? I felt like an outsider in my own life, a spectator watching the man who had taken my wife's affection. The more I observed him, the more I plotted. I needed to expose him, not just to Sarah, but to everyone. I wanted him to feel the weight of his actions, to understand the destruction he had caused. I began to think about how I could leverage the park's atmosphere to my advantage. I remembered that the theme park had a reputation to uphold. Any negative publicity could be detrimental to their image. I started gathering evidence, photos of Tony flirting with guests, screenshots of his social media posts that hinted at his reckless lifestyle, and even the messages I had found on Sarah's phone. I was determined to create a narrative that would tarnish his reputation. I could already envision the fallout, a scandal that would ripple through the park, making it impossible for him to continue working there. But there was a moral dilemma gnawing at me. Was I really willing to destroy this man's life? I had never been one to hurt others, and the thought of causing someone else pain made me hesitate. But then I thought of Sarah, of her betrayal, and my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. He had taken something precious from me, and I needed to take something from him in return. I decided to confront Sarah. I needed to hear her side of the story to understand how she could betray me so completely. One evening, I sat her down in our living room, my heart racing. The air was thick with tension, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "What's wrong, Jake?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "Don't play coy with me." "I know about Tony," I replied, watching her expression shift from confusion to shock. Her face paled. "What do you mean?" "I saw the messages," I confessed, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. "You've been cheating on me, Sarah." Her silence was deafening. I could see the realization washing over her, the guilt creeping into her features. "Jake, I can explain." Explain what?" "How you threw away our marriage for some thrill-seeking ride operator." I interrupted, my voice rising. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake," she stammered, her eyes pleading for understanding. "A mistake? You think that's all it was?" I shot back, my anger boiling over. "You let it go on long enough for me to find out, Sarah. That's not a mistake, that's a choice." I could see the tears forming in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. All I could think about was the betrayal and the man who had taken her from me. I had to remind myself of my plan. This was just the beginning. As the night wore on, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. I had confronted her, but it wasn't enough. I needed to execute my plan against Tony. The thrill of revenge was intoxicating, and as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of what was to come. With each passing moment, my resolve grew stronger. I would expose Tony for the fraud he was, and in doing so, I would reclaim my dignity and my life. I would show him that there were consequences for his actions, and I would take pleasure in watching his world crumble. The next phase of my plan began to take shape in my mind. I needed to gather more evidence against Tony, something that would be undeniable and would resonate with the park's management. I had already taken photos of him flirting with guests, but I needed something more substantial, something that would shake the very foundation of his employment. The thrill of revenge fueled me, and I felt like a predator stalking its prey. I started visiting the theme park more frequently, under the guise of being a regular customer. I paid attention to Tony's interactions, watching him as he operated the rides with a carefree smile. I noted his schedule and the times he was most active, particularly during the busy afternoons when families flocked to the park. I also began speaking to other employees, gathering intel about him. One afternoon, I struck up a conversation with a girl named Lisa who worked at one of the concession stands. She was friendly and eager to chat, and after a few minutes, I casually mentioned Tony. Her eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, Tony. He's a real piece of work," she said, rolling her eyes. "He's always flirting with the guests and making inappropriate jokes. I've seen him get too close to some of the girls who come through here." I felt a sense of vindication. I wasn't the only one who saw through his charming facade. I pressed her for more details, and she shared stories of how he often crossed the line with guests, making them uncomfortable with his comments. It was the leverage I needed. If I could compile enough testimonies, I could present a case against him that would be impossible for the park to ignore. Over the next few weeks, I continued to gather evidence. I recorded conversations with Lisa and other employees, documenting their experiences with Tony. I even managed to capture a video of him flirting with a young woman while he was supposed to be operating the ride. The woman looked visibly uncomfortable, and Tony seemed oblivious to the red flags. It was the perfect piece of evidence to showcase his unprofessional behavior. But my plan wasn't just about revenge. It was about making a statement. I wanted to expose the kind of man he was, to reveal his true colors to Sarah and everyone else who had been fooled by his charm. I wanted to show them that he was not just a harmless ride operator. He was a man who disrespected boundaries and took advantage of vulnerable situations. As I prepared to execute my plan, I wrestled with the moral implications of what I was doing. Was I justified in ruining his life? I had to remind myself that he had already ruined mine. I couldn't let guilt hold me back. I was driven by a sense of justice, a need to reclaim my dignity in the face of this betrayal. Finally, the day arrived when I felt ready to take action. I had compiled my evidence into a neat presentation, complete with video clips, text messages, and witness testimonies. I decided to confront the park's management directly. I had learned that they were particularly sensitive to issues of harassment and misconduct, especially in an environment meant for families. I scheduled a meeting with the park's HR manager, a stern woman named Karen who had a reputation for being no-nonsense. I knew she would take my claims seriously, especially with the evidence I had gathered. As I walked into her office, I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming in," Karen said, looking up from her desk. She had a sharp gaze that made me feel both anxious and empowered. "Thank you for seeing me," I replied, my voice steady. "I have some serious concerns about one of your employees, Tony." I handed her the printed evidence, my heart racing as she began to review it. I watched her expression shift from curiosity to disbelief as she took in the details. "This is quite serious," she said, looking up at me. "Are you sure about this?" "Absolutely," I said, my voice firm. "I've witnessed his behavior and I have multiple testimonies from other employees. He's a liability and he shouldn't be working here." Karen leaned back in her chair, contemplating the gravity of the situation. "We take these matters very seriously. If what you say is true, it could have significant repercussions for him." I felt a surge of satisfaction. This was the moment I had worked so hard for. I was finally taking control of my narrative, and I could see the wheels turning in Karen's mind. "I want to ensure that he's held accountable for his actions," I continued, my voice steady. "He needs to understand that there are consequences for crossing the line." Karen nodded, her expression serious. "I assure you, we will investigate this thoroughly. If we find that there is merit to your claims, we will take appropriate action." As I left her office, I felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. I had done it. I had taken the first step in not just exposing Tony, but also reclaiming my dignity. I knew there would be consequences for him, and while I did relish the idea of ruining his life, I felt justified in my actions. After all, he had taken everything from me. But as the adrenaline faded, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning. I was now in a game of chess, and I needed to remain several moves ahead. I had opened Pandora's box, and I wasn't sure what would come spilling out next. The days following my meeting with Karen passed slowly, each one feeling like an eternity. I had set the wheels in motion, but I was left with a gnawing anxiety about the outcome. Would they believe me? Would they take action? I replayed the details of my evidence over and over in my mind, trying to convince myself that the truth would prevail. Meanwhile, my relationship with Sarah continued to deteriorate. She was desperate to mend things between us, but I found it hard to look at her without feeling a wave of betrayal wash over me. The love I once felt for her was now clouded by anger and disappointment. Every time she reached out to me, I felt a mix of guilt and resentment. I wanted to scream at her to make her understand the depth of my pain, but I also knew that I needed to focus on my plan. A week after my meeting with Karen, I received a call from her office. My heart raced as I answered the phone, anticipation and dread swirling within me. "Mr. Thompson, this is Corinne from the park," she said, her tone serious. "I wanted to update you on the situation regarding Tony." "Have you spoken to him?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anxiety creeping in. "Yes, we have conducted an initial investigation based on the evidence you provided. We took your claims very seriously, and I must inform you that we've placed him on suspension pending further review." A wave of satisfaction washed over me. "Suspension, so he's not working there anymore." "That's correct," she confirmed. "We will be conducting interviews with other staff members and reviewing the footage you provided. If we find substantial evidence of misconduct, we will take appropriate action." I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. I had succeeded in my mission to expose Tony, and for the first time since discovering the affair, I felt a glimmer of hope. But as the initial thrill of victory faded, a new feeling took its place, an unsettling sense of guilt. Was I really doing the right thing? I had wanted justice, but at what cost? As I wrestled with these thoughts, I decided to confront Sarah again. I needed to be honest with her about what I had done. I wanted her to understand the depth of my hurt and the lengths I was willing to go to reclaim my dignity. That evening I sat her down, my heart heavy with the weight of my revelations. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about Tony," I began, watching her expression shift from curiosity to concern. "What about him?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I went to the park's management and reported him," I confessed, watching her reaction closely. "I gathered evidence of his inappropriate behavior and they've suspended him." Her eyes widened in shock. You did what?" "I couldn't just sit back and let him get away with it," I said, my voice firm. "He's not the man you think he is, and I wanted to make sure he faced the consequences for what he did." For a moment Sarah was silent, processing my words. "Jake, I never wanted this to happen. It was a mistake and I was confused. I didn't mean to hurt you." I felt a surge of anger. "Confused? How could you be confused about cheating on your husband? You threw away everything we built together for a thrill. Please just listen to me," she pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I know I messed up, but I'm trying to make it right. I want to fix our marriage." "Fix it? How can we fix something that's broken because of your choices?" I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "You don't get to decide when it's convenient for you to care about our relationship." As we argued, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. I was no longer the victim. I was taking control of my narrative. I had exposed the man who had come between us, and while it didn't erase the pain Sarah had caused, it gave me a sense of purpose. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that my actions were only pushing us further apart. I wanted her to understand the gravity of her betrayal, but I also wanted her to realize that I was not the same man who would forgive and forget. I had changed, hardened by the betrayal and fueled by revenge. The following day, I received another call from Corinne. "Jake, we've completed our initial investigation, and we'd like to invite you to a meeting to discuss our findings," she said, her voice steady. I felt a rush of anticipation. This was it, my chance to see how my actions had impacted Tony and what the park planned to do next. "I'll be there," I replied, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. When I arrived at the park, I felt a knot of tension in my stomach. I entered the meeting room to find Corinne and a few other members of the management team waiting for me. They greeted me with serious expressions, and I took a seat, eager to hear what they had to say. "Thank you for coming in today, Jake," Corinne said, her tone professional. "We've reviewed the evidence you provided, and we take these matters very seriously. We've conducted interviews with other employees, and we have confirmed several instances of inappropriate behavior on Tony's part." My heart raced as I listened. "What does that mean for him?" I asked, barely able to contain my anticipation. "We are moving forward with disciplinary action, which could include termination," Corinne replied, her eyes focused on mine. "We wanted to give you the opportunity to share any additional thoughts or concerns you might have." As I sat there, I felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. I had succeeded in my mission to expose Tony, but I also realized that I was stepping into a territory that could lead to unintended consequences. I had wanted justice, but at what point did it become revenge? Just make sure he understands the pain he's caused, I said, my voice steady. He needs to feel the consequences of his actions. Corinne nodded, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. We will ensure that he is held accountable. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. As I left the meeting, I felt a sense of finality. I had taken action, and now it was out of my hands, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a line. I had exposed a man, and while I felt justified, I knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger journey. I was about to discover that revenge often comes with its own set of consequences, and the fallout from my actions would be more complicated than I could have ever imagined. The days after my meeting with Corinne were a whirlwind of emotions. I had successfully exposed Tony's misconduct, but the victory felt hollow. I kept replaying the events in my mind, questioning whether I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I was consumed by a sense of unease, a nagging feeling that perhaps I had gone too far. As I walked through the park one last time, I couldn't help but notice the families enjoying their day, the laughter of children ringing in my ears. I had once been one of those happy families, blissfully ignorant of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of my marriage. Now I felt like an outsider, a ghost haunting the very place that had once brought me joy. That evening, Sarah confronted me again. She had been trying to reach out, desperate to salvage what remained of our relationship. I could see the pain in her eyes, and part of me wanted to soften, to forgive her. But every time I looked at her, I was reminded of the betrayal, and the anger surged back. "Jake, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to work through this. I want to make things right." I stared at her, my heart hardened. "How can we work through this when you've shattered my trust? You've shown me who you really are." I was confused. I made a mistake, she pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you and I want to fix this. I'll do anything." "Anything?" I scoffed. "What does that even mean? You think a few apologies will erase the fact that you chose to be with him?" She looked at me, desperation in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you, Jake. I was lost and I didn't know how to handle everything. But I want to be with you, to fight for us." Her words struck a chord, but I was too far gone in my anger to let them in. "You don't get to decide when you want to fight for us, Sarah. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." As I turned away, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I knew I was being harsh, but I couldn't help it. I needed her to understand the gravity of her actions. I needed her to feel the weight of her betrayal, just as I had felt it. The next day, I received a call from Corinne again. "Jake, I wanted to update you on Tony's situation," she said, her tone serious. "We've completed our investigation, and we've decided to terminate his employment effective immediately." A surge of satisfaction coursed through me, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of dread. "What does that mean for him?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "He will receive a severance package, but we've made it clear that any future employment in this industry will depend on his ability to provide references," she explained. "We take these matters seriously, and we will not tolerate any form of harassment." I felt a mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and a twinge of guilt. I had succeeded in my mission, but I also knew that I had potentially ruined a man's life. I had wanted justice, but at what cost? As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that my actions had consequences I hadn't fully considered. I had set out to expose Tony, to seek revenge for the betrayal he had inflicted on my marriage. But in doing so, I had also unleashed a chain of events that would affect more than just him. Over the next week, news of Tony's termination spread through the park. I overheard whispers among the employees, their voices tinged with a mix of sympathy and disdain. I realized that my actions had not only impacted Tony, but had also created a ripple effect that affected everyone around him. I had become the villain in this story, the man who had taken down a beloved ride operator. As the days passed, I began to feel the weight of my actions. I had wanted to reclaim my dignity, but I had also lost a part of myself in the process. I was no longer the man who believed in love and trust. I was a man consumed by anger and revenge. The final straw came when I received a message from Sarah. "Jake, I need to talk to you about Tony. It's important," she wrote. I felt a surge of anger at the thought of her still caring about him. What could possibly be important enough for you to reach out to me about him? I replied, my fingers trembling as I typed. Please just meet me, she begged. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. I thought it might provide closure, but deep down, I knew it was more complicated than that. As I approached our meeting spot, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. What could she possibly say that would change anything? When I arrived, I found Sarah sitting on a bench, her expression somber. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice shaky. What do you want, Sarah? I asked, my impatience boiling over. I wanted to tell you that Tony reached out to me, she said, her eyes pleading for understanding. He's devastated, Jake. He's lost everything because of what happened. Good, I replied, my voice cold. He deserves it. Please listen to me, she urged. He's not just some villain. He made mistakes, yes, but he's also a human being. He's struggling to find work now, and I think he's hit rock bottom. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. Why do you care, Sarah? You chose him over me. You made your bed, now you have to lie in it. I know I messed up and I'm not trying to defend him, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I can't help but feel guilty. I never wanted this for him. Her words struck a chord within me. I had wanted Tony to feel the consequences of his actions, but I hadn't considered the human side of the story. I had been so consumed by my anger and desire for revenge that I had lost sight of the fact that he was a person too. Jake, I'm not asking you to forgive him. I just want you to understand that revenge doesn't bring happiness, she continued. It only leads to more pain. As I looked at her, I felt a mixture of anger and empathy. I didn't want to feel sorry for Tony, but I also didn't want to become the man who took pleasure in another's suffering. I had to ask myself, was this really who I wanted to be? As I walked away from our conversation, I felt a shift within me. I had set out on a path of revenge, but perhaps it was time to reconsider my choices. I needed to find a way to heal, not just for myself but for Sarah and even for Tony. The journey of revenge had taken a toll on my soul, and I realized that it was time to take a step back and reevaluate what truly mattered. The days following my conversation with Sarah were filled with reflection. I had spent so much time consumed by anger and the desire for revenge that I had lost sight of who I was. I had become a man driven by vengeance, and it was time to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my happiness. I started to realize that while Tony had been a catalyst for my pain, I was the one who had allowed that pain to define me. I had let his actions dictate my emotions, my choices, and ultimately, my path in life. It was time to take back that power. I reached out to Corinne at the theme park and requested a follow-up meeting. I needed to express my gratitude for how they handled the situation with Tony. I appreciate the swift action you took, I said when we met. But I also want to acknowledge that this situation has made me reflect on my own actions and the consequences they have. Corinne looked at me with a mix of surprise and respect. It takes a lot of courage to admit that, Jake. It's easy to get lost in anger and revenge. I'm glad you're seeing the bigger picture. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted. I didn't want to be the villain in this story. I wanted to be the hero of my own life. I needed to focus on healing, not just for myself but for those around me. As I continued to navigate my emotions, I found myself wanting to reach out to Tony. I knew it was unconventional, but I felt compelled to offer him a lifeline. I wanted to let him know that I understood the repercussions of his actions and that I hoped he could find a way to rebuild his life. One evening, I drafted a message. Tony, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted you to know that I understand the pain of losing everything. I hope you can find a way to move forward. We all make mistakes, and it's how we learn from them that defines us. I hesitated before hitting send, but ultimately I knew it was the right thing to do. I didn't expect a response, nor did I want to reopen old wounds, but I felt a sense of closure in reaching out. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with Sarah. It wasn't easy, and trust didn't come back overnight, but I was determined to work through the pain together. We attended couples therapy, where we unpacked our feelings and learned to communicate more openly. I realized that while her betrayal had hurt me deeply, forgiveness was the only way to truly heal. Sarah was committed to proving that she was willing to fight for our marriage. She took responsibility for her actions and made an effort to show me how much she valued our relationship. It was a long road, but slowly, I began to see glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with. One day, as we sat in therapy, I turned to her and said, "I'm willing to work through this, but it's going to take time. I need to know that you're all in, too." "I'm here, Jake," she replied, tears in her eyes. "I know I hurt you and I'm so sorry. I want to earn your trust back and I'm committed to doing whatever it takes." As I looked into her eyes, I felt a flicker of hope. We had both been through the fire, and while the scars would remain, I realized that they didn't have to define us. We could emerge stronger together. Months later, I learned from a mutual friend that Tony had found a new job outside the theme park industry. He was working at a local community center, helping to run youth programs. It seemed he was on a path of redemption, and while I didn't know him personally, I felt a sense of relief. Perhaps we could all find a way to move forward. I had learned that revenge may provide a temporary sense of satisfaction, but it rarely leads to lasting happiness. Instead, I found that forgiveness and understanding were far more powerful. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my happiness, not through vengeance, but through the strength to heal and rebuild. In the end, I realized that love is not just about the good times, it's also about navigating the storms together. Sarah and I had weathered the worst, and while the road ahead would still have its challenges, I felt a renewed sense of hope. We were ready to embrace whatever came next, not just as individuals, but as partners committed to healing the wounds of the past. As I stood on the observation deck of the theme park one last time, I watched families enjoying the rides below. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had learned that life is too short to hold on to anger and resentment. I chose love, forgiveness, and the possibility of a brighter future. And with that, I walked away from the park, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life.